What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Eric Froton here for the College Fantasy Football All Access podcast with Josh Chevalier and JD Yonke, and it is week 13. A somber week 13, because that means that we only have one more week left of college fantasy football after this. Oh, I feel like we should be playing taps, but Josh, why don't you tell us about some of your week one of the college fantasy football playoff lamentations, or just, storylines you think that are worth noting during the first week?
Yeah, well, one that I felt like was going to cost me, and it just would have been a killer, and the 50-teamer that we talk about quite a bit here. I had pretty good running back combo between Isaac Brown and Ashton Genty. So any week I'm starting those two in that league, I feel pretty positive that I'm going to be all right. Other one I have is Nate Noel, and I had Le'Veon Moss too. So I had 4 running backs that were like good. Le'Veon Moss tears his ACL a couple weeks ago. Look, Nate Noel, I didn't start him because he hasn't done anything for the last 3 or 4 weeks. He sits on my bench, 27 carries, 150 yards, and a touchdown. So I'm already kicking myself. Start Isaac Brown thinking it's Stanford. He's going to crush. Injures his shoulder. Drive 2, scores 0.2 points. And I'm like, man, am I gonna lose because I sat Nate Noel and then I played Isaac Brown? All not bad moves considering Duke Watson just went ham. And
dude, seriously, Duke Watson, household name, obviously, before this week.
Yeah, yep, clearly. So that was one. I did squeak out the win against Cody Carpentier, because he had everybody on the bye this week. But holy cow, that was one Isaac Brown that, in other leagues that actually did cost me. Not quite as important to me, but it cost me, a few playoff runs for sure.
Nice. JD, anybody in particular that you could have started that would have won you the week one?
I don't know if there was any specific ones. I think one guy that probably got a lot of people that I had down because he's on a decent amount of my teams and was kind of hot earlier in the year, so it's probably on some playoff rosters, is Dante Wright for Temple, who came back from injury and didn't have a lot on his status, got updated to probable. So I ended up putting into most of my lineup. So I kind of lucked out there. I didn't know what I was going to get. I took a flyer, but it was a tough flyer to take. So I bet he was on a lot of people's benches. But the guy that's just on my list right now is DT Sheffield, just absolutely killing me. Just brutal. Then you had last week with Army. You figure, it was the ball control thing, and he's been good for, 12 targets a game, super explosive, and great matchup in a dome, and no siree. So not great from DT. Couldn't see that one coming. Isaac Brown is tough. I know me and Josh talk a lot about him. He's on a lot of our dynasty rosters, which means we're starting him in the playoffs, and is what it is. Not much you can do about that. And another guy who I targeted in a lot of supplementals this year was Kyron Lacey on LSU. Kind of for those rosters where you're trying to make a push, and this is where you needed him to be at his best, and he had 0, I believe, for much of that game, and caught a few passes at the end, but was not near enough to salvage. So yeah, those were some guys that stood out to me.
Yeah, along the UNT North Texas front, I have Chandler Morris on a few of my teams, and he did not do us any favors as well. They got smoked by UTSA 48-27. Also, another honorable mention in the Kings Classic League run by John Lobb and drafted literally in the Canton Pro Football Hall of Fame media room. So that is always one that we want to do well in. I lost to Dwight Peebles, big factor. Denzel Boston as well did not exactly show up against UCLA. Got ourselves a lot of Jonah Coleman, but not so much Denzel Boston. Guy left on the bench in favor of him. Drum roll. Antonio Williams.
Oh,
45 points in this particular scoring format would have won me the week. That one hurt, obviously. Also could have subbed him in for Anthony Tyus, who just had a rather pedestrian 35 yards or so and a touchdown. Nothing close to Antonio Williams. So a couple of those beat a wide receiver, a flex spot. Wish I could have had him in.
Yeah. Another one that is interesting too is Joey, Hobert, or I can't remember how to say his name. Is it Abear? How do you say Joey's last
I
name?
don't know. Actually, I'm usually good with all those. I thought it was Hobert.
I think his dad is like. Anyways,
is
that
it
guy.
Abear? Is it Bobby? Yeah. No. Okay, fair enough.
I don't know.
Texas State wide receiver.
But he definitely fell flat. I mean, he got injured, but a guy that you're
but I
relying
mean,
on.
gosh, every time I took him on overs twice this year, didn't hit either. Didn't hit. It just teased me. Like, all right, maybe it's time for Joey Hobert. I want some action on a Thursday night game. No.
Yeah, and the guy that did go off in his, instead of him,
Williams. Of course, he did it again. Yep, he had like 20 points.
And Ishmael Mahdi had a good game.
And your boy.
Yeah, like a guy that we've been like, hey, you should be careful. Because they've been rotating quite a bit. He decides that, not a ton, but I mean, he hit 21.8 points, 2 touchdowns. So, but more than what you're expecting out of him. So, yeah, those are a couple guys for me.
So, would we like to move on to start and sits? I assume that's probably how we're going to do this. We've got a couple already loaded in the chamber. I've got certainly a couple questions on my own. Why don't we go to our listeners before we start talking about ourselves, as always? Private chat. We have from Mr. Pino for Heisman on Twitter. Thank you very much for giving us this question. Mekhi Bernard, Jaden Ott, or Kai Robichaux. Pick one to start. I think we know how I feel about Jaden Ott. Okay, I've certainly led the charge on that. He's been my Javian Hawkins has been my Phil Maffa. He has been the Will Shipley to Javian Hawkins' Phil Maffa so far this year. So I'll let you guys take this.
Yeah, what thoughts do you have, JD?
I guess Bernard trusting the broken offense is not very easy. I don't know. Iowa State's defense seems to be a little overrated, but you can't trust anything with Utah. So, I mean, you can trust he's going to get some work, but he's also been getting hurt 2 straight games. I think he's been playing through. Looks like he keeps limping off the field, looking like he broke a collarbone. He's done that like 2 straight games. So he's clearly playing through something that's not great. Otherwise, he'd be getting 25 touches a game. And who knows? Maybe he does here. Maybe he stays on the field, and that's what happens because I don't know what else they're going to do. But Boston College, it's an okay matchup. It's not beautiful. It's really close, actually, between Robichaux. I think if we get
it's okay. It's UNC. It's more like what Boston College is that scares me. Yeah.
They slow it down, and when they have those guys healthy, they use like 4 backs. So like if we know Turbo's going to come back, if we think Ward might come back, I mean they use those guys on the field. It's just the kind of touchdown dependent. So I lean toward Ott.
Oh, that's gross. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, JD. I don't know. Are you trying to trigger me right now or something? Taking Jaden Ott over Kai Robichaux? Robichaux had 28 carries and then 21. He's had 2 touchdowns each of the last 2 games.
Yeah,
I mean, it's UNC.
It's because his teammates were hurt.
Oh God! Well, nobody's hurt for Ott, and he stinks.
Ott was hurt. He's been hurt all year. He finally was healthy. He averaged 7 yards a touch. Come on.
Oh, Javian Thomas is better.
Come on.
Better. I don't understand. It's time. It's time to move on from it. Anyways, we'll move on. Of course. Actually, we should probably take a break. We'll take a break right now before we go on to the next question.
I love it.
Boom. All right, we're going to go on to well-known Twitter commentator. We appreciate him, Cuz Lightyear. An excellent Twitter handle. and he asks, who would we rather have at QB? Gives us, I mean, just rocket fires 5 of them off at us. So get mentally prepared. I don't know if he meant he wants 1 or 2. We'll probably give him 2 here with a hierarchy. Garrett Nussmeier, after that Florida game. Ooh. Jaden Mayava making some highlight reel worthy throws there for USC in a dramatic victory. Certainly breathed a little life into that offense, at least downfield. Deuce Robinson with a couple of big catches. Aiden Childs, who has a nice matchup. Who doesn't like Purdue? I mean, that's a good time. CJ Bailey, sensational freshman over there at NC State. And then finally, do you feel lucky with Noah Fafita? Do you want to roll the dice with Noah Fafita? Speaking of fantasy zombies, I think he might be the quintessential. So, gentlemen, I guess we'll start with JD. Do you have any opinions on those 5 quarterbacks who you take, 1 or 2? Call it 2 of them.
That was a lot of names, so
I know. I'm sorry. It's in the
ones
private
that stood
chat.
out. I saw this question on Twitter, and then looking up 5 different matchups or 6 different matchups. It's I don't even remember where I started. But Maeva definitely stands out. Okay, no one's going to be scared of the UCLA matchup, even though their match has been low scoring. I don't care too much in Maeva's favor. A little mobile. Offense looks better. Lincoln Riley rivalry game. Not really going to be a difficult environment. Probably aren't expecting any weather. He's kind of the one that shoots to the top of my list. It depends how risky you're feeling, like how good you're feeling the rest of your lineup. But if I think I need some points, I might take the swing on Childs. Like Purdue is a full fade all year long, all year long. It's been
really
full
is so
fade.
dependable. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it going to finally not hit now that we're in the playoffs? I mean, knock on wood, it's been hitting all year.
Yeah, I tend to agree with JD. I mean, I think with both of those, Jaden Mayava, that matchup is really good. I mean, he's a guy that he's just, even if he has a bad game, he's going to have a good fantasy game because he's going to put up points, Like even if he has 2 interceptions, he's going to throw 3 touchdowns and 300 yards. Exactly what we were expecting from him last week. Open up the downfield passing game, like you mentioned. Froton is that's what you like from Mayava, and he's going to give it to you. And I think, in this type of rivalry game, I think you could see a few more points than you would maybe if they were playing some other opponent. And the other side, yeah, Childs, look, like you just said, Purdue, it's a great matchup. I mean, Childs certainly has high ceiling with who he is. The only other one I would really consider on this list, I think, is Nussmeier, but I just don't know how lucky you're feeling right now with Nussmeier and, even going up against Vanderbilt, who has been tough, right, against certain opponents. It's just, it feels a little risky. So I'm going to definitely say Childs as the number 2.
Yeah, I think that's. I'll make it a clean sweep on those 2. I don't want any part of Garrett Nussmeier right now. I mean, hey, maybe he does. But this is the playoffs now, and there's such thing as a floor. And I don't think that Garrett Nussmeier met the floor criteria in terms of last game, certainly with his performance. And with Jaden Mayava in the rivalry game, which I will be attending in Pasadena, which I'm very excited about, I just think it's a case where he made some of the dynamic plays we really needed to see. I thought it could be Jacoby Lane, who showed out in front of JD and I when we attended, a USC game, but really was Deuce Robinson. Just the downfield ability to throw the ball and his ability to go up and get it with the highlight reel play of the day. You just didn't see Miller Moss making those plays. So a clean sweep. Give me, I think Childs and Mayava are the 2 high upside plays. Very nicely done, guys. Very nicely done. All right. To the comments. Kevin Parker, my brother. Thank you very much for attending here. He has a question. Hoover, TCU, our boy Tucker Gleason, or Kyron Drones? We have to pick one. Hoover, Gleason, or Drones? I know that Gleason has Ohio this week, which frankly, I think it pretty much eliminates him for me. They've been excellent defensively. And while I do like Toledo, I was actually capping that game for props purposes since they are out, as you guys know. And, with that Toledo wide receiver core, you want to find any reason where they're in like the mid 40s or so between Van Dross and Newton. You want to find a reason to take those reasonable overs, but gosh, that Ohio D, pretty darn good, especially when it comes to the pass D. You can get them a little bit on the ground, kind of in balance. I'm curious what you guys think about those options.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm gonna have to go with Hoover, just because Arizona. I think you've seen some guys have some success against them. We've seen Hoover then chuck it around. Cam Cook got going a little bit last game, but they're still a team that's dependent on, I think, getting it done through the air, and especially with Savion Williams coming alive, even if he's splitting time at running back and receiver. I mean, all it takes is him throwing a few to Savion and letting him take off and do all the work. So I like Hoover a lot. I mean, I think his floor is nice in this game, but also the ceiling of a team that, like, when you're playing against a Tetsuo McMillan, I mean, they could put up points and keep it close enough to where they're going to have to score versus, Toledo and Ohio. That game just seems a bit risky. It's MAC in November. You never know what the weather's going to be like, the wind, especially this time of year. And then Drone's playing Duke. I think that Duke defense is like
Slow Duke. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just those other two just are as uninspiring as can be to me, as far as players I'd want to play at this time of the year in the playoffs.
Yeah,
gosh,
I think I'm out on drones. You got to be out on drones right now, I think.
Yeah,
it's not looking good.
Yeah,
I too started with Gleason. Like, that's the guy who catches your eye here because he's been really good running the ball lately, really popping off the screen. But I think there's a lot of unknowns with Ohio. Like, the defense at this point, they're gonna have to prove to me their defense is not gonna shut these teams down. Are they going to totally shut down Toledo? Probably not. But like, it's just been really bad for a while for their opponents. And I get it. They're a MAC team. Toledo's talented. Could not work here. But right now, I don't see enough reasons to feel confident in Gleason. Whereas I am confident that Arizona is not looking good and that they're looking for a new head coach and that this team is totally quitting and they're already without like 3 of their best defensive players. So why would they suddenly have a great game? I think the least surprising thing here would be if TCU kind of drops a bomb on them.
I like it.
Understandable. Well, I think that I'm going to move over to our particular personal start sit evaluations. If you don't mind, I will start so you guys have time to kind of get yourselves together. I'm going with my longtime home league. Been in this for 24 years, as we all know. And this is a non-PPR format, 14 teams. Non-PPR, so that obviously is quite performance oriented. We are switching to half PPR next season, though. We finally said enough is enough. That being said, 2 questions on the running back side. Somebody who's already been mentioned by Josh, Nate Noel. Nate Noel. Oh boy, what do we do with him? Playing Mississippi State, as good a matchup as you're going to get. Coming off the heavy workload he just got against South Carolina, like Mississippi State, it's all just begging for you to play him. I also have Tawee Walker. They're playing at Nebraska. We saw Woody Marks had a very productive game last game. I'm not particularly afraid of the Nebraska defense. No offense, Chad. Zach Hall. I know he's probably upset listening to this right now. But then you also have Khalil Mullings playing Northwestern. But Mullings, it has faded a little bit after a pretty hot start. Noel had a tough middle portion, was banged up for a little while there. Now one game. Does that resurrect him against Mississippi State? Also, you have Tawee Walker. Been getting the bulk, had a tough schedule recently, which meant he didn't get in the end zone the past 2 games. But as we know, Phil Longo just got ousted by Wisconsin. He is now out on the unemployment line. Did not work out there like it did at North Carolina. Tawee Walker has been getting all the carries. Does that change how he is used at Nebraska this week? Pick 2 of those 3 between Noel, Walker, and Mullings. Gentlemen.
Oh, it's funny you bring up Nate Noel
I've
because
got tough buys. I've got Jordan James on a buy.
Yeah.
I have Le'Veon Moss who got hurt. Also, Mario Anderson's on a buy. So those 3 guys right there take, a lot of the depth off. So
yeah,
got to rotate those 3.
Yeah, Nate Noel's the one that I'm personally looking at in the 50-teamer. And it's like, man, with my season on the line, 27. And look, if he got like 17 carries and did like 135 yards or something, like I'd be all about starting him. But 27 for Nate Noel, I'm like, man, that's a lot of carries. Is he going to be able to do it back-to-back weeks? And I don't know, but I don't know how you don't start him. I mean, given that those are your options, like, is Khalil Mulling, like, can you trust Mullings more than
since he hasn't cleared 30 yards since October 19th? It's a month.
Yeah.
30 yards he hasn't cleared. And he hasn't scored a touchdown. And he doesn't catch passes. Like he's been a complete albatross around your team. He scored a touchdown last week against Indiana, but I mean, great, 9.8 points. Hooray. Even then, he scored 15 against Illinois, but then 4.9 the week before against Washington. Like it's been a tough run for 5 weeks now, essentially.
Yeah. So it feels like you're a bit pot committed with Nate Noel, and then it's between Walker and Mullings, and I think you have to go Walker, right? I mean, I think he's going to get the carries to justify it. I mean, with the coaching change, that is a little bit of a scary thing to me because you never know what they're going to do. Like youth movement, Tawee Walker always seems to fall out of favor with coaches in general. Yeah. But yeah, my thoughts are Walker and Noel, but I'd love to hear JD's rationale. I know he doesn't like Mullings, but I want to hear his rationale.
This is an easy call. Bench Mullings. Easy. Mullings stinks. Michigan stinks. The Longo variable is one, but because the Wisconsin, I was looking at them. I'm an Oregon fan, so I took a deep look at Wisconsin, and I mean, they don't have anything behind Walker. He's all that's going on the offense. The passing offense isn't really working. They showed pretty well. Obviously, they almost won that game, so give them some respect. But the young kid, Dupree, like he's been like one of the least efficient running backs in the entire country. So I get the youth movement. I think the youth movement is giving him a few carries to the RB2, and that kid's not ready for 15 touches a game. I don't think so. He hasn't shown it. So, I think Walker, and especially in like non-PPR leagues, and that's why Mullings actually I think is in consideration because he's like the perfect non-PPR running back, right? Because it's kind of touchdown reliant. But that's kind of how I view Walker too, just like really like old school fantasy style volume based play. Which again, Longo, who knows? But yeah.
Got it. Oh, thank you very much. And I'll do one more before moving on to you. The wide receiver position, again, no PPR. Trey Harris looks like he's going, so he'll be in good shape. I have him in there. Obviously, we have to have the probable Heisman winner with Travis Hunter. You have to start him. There's no sitting Travis Hunter or Trey Harris. But my third wide receiver spot, we have ECU, Winston Wright, playing North Texas. Coming on hot lately. Had a real good game in the last 2 weeks. North Texas is essentially the dream matchup. ECU has something to prove where they just fired their coach as well. So you have a whole new staff in there. They want to go and prove something. So Winston Wright is my current guy there. Like I said, 3 touchdowns over the course of the past 2 games, and he's got 4 carries. So it's pretty appealing. But then you have Jeremy Bernard. He's had 80 yards each of the past 3 games, though no touchdowns at Oklahoma. You have Emeka Egbuka, my boy, Igbokwe, 25 yards last game, 10 yards the game before, 31 yards the game before that, 20 yards the game before that. Yeah, he had a touchdown, 2 touchdowns sprinkled in, but these are still in non-PPR formats. These are single-digit performances here. I mean, he just hasn't been brought out. But you look at the first half of the season, and he was completely unbenchable. I mean, through October 12th, the Oregon game, frankly, JD, it's like he had to rub it in your nose by catching 10 passes for 93 yards, having 2 carries for 20 and a touchdown. And then since then, it's like, all right, well, I showed out against Oregon. You know, I insulted JD and made him mad. And now he's just taken the last month off. Does he come back and do it against Indiana? I mean, it's a legitimate question over the past 4 games. Then you have Malachi Fields. All right, I mean, he's doing a pretty good job on the yardage front. Even against Notre Dame last game, he caught 4 for 81, but over the past 5 games, I mean, it makes it kind of tough, especially going up against a tough SMU team. So those are my options. Igbokwe versus Indiana, tough matchup. Malachi Fields, SMU, Jeremy Bernard, Oklahoma, or Winston Wright at North Texas. One of the 4. Any thoughts on those, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'd go with Winston Wright. I mean, I think what he's done the last couple of weeks, the fact that he scored touchdowns, I think is significant, right, in a no PPR format. And the matchup is just so good, like you said, and he's done that. And Hauser didn't even have a great game last game. And he still performed. And so
Sowell did get hurt too. He left the game.
Yeah.
Chase Sowell, who was doing pretty well, but he got banged up, kind of puts a little more heat on him, just to add a little color.
No, for sure. So, I mean, I think obviously the other guys have the name power, but I think Winston Wright is the right play for this week. If you're just going with the pure matchup, which at this point of the year, with the consistency that he's had the last couple of weeks, I think you go with that.
Any thoughts, JD?
Yeah, I think I'd end up the same way. If it was PPR, I'd feel much more confident in Wright. I feel like that's I mean, I know it hasn't been for a lot of the year, but it's just certainly turning that way, especially with Sowell out or likely out. It looked like a pretty good hammy or something.
Sure
he was limping pretty good.
He was, yeah, you saw that too, right?
Did not look good whatsoever. And he was already, like, the usage was already super encouraging the last 2 weeks. So I see absolutely no reason why he's not the wide receiver 1 in a dream matchup. I think I'd have to click play. I guess I'm more out on Igbokwe, but just that many games in a row. The Fields thing is tough because I don't know. I guess I'm at the point I can't totally trust Fields, but I definitely took a longer look at Fields considering this question because it just seems like, and I know that's a dumb way, it just seems, but like a guy for him, what'd you say, 1 touchdown in 5 games? Just kind of feels like that's gotta correct, especially with that encouraging game, kind of encouraging compared to his game before that against Notre Dame. So I would definitely consider Fields, but I'd end up with Wright.
Did you guys watch the Notre Dame UVA game at all? Get any eyes on it?
Sound off.
I did not. It was just too much of a blowout, to prioritize in that slot.
Yeah, because my question is, I didn't get a chance to deep dive into this today, but what I wanted to look at with Fields is who did he catch passes with? Was it Calandria or was it with when Musket came in the second half when he got that production? Because I think that would play into my decision too. Because if he had, Musket came in at halftime, so if he had 3 catches for 67 yards in the second half, then that would give me the ball. The offense seemed to move better with Musket, and I think he's going to start this next game. I do think Calandria is going to get benched against SMU, so that would make a bit of a difference for me too. And considering Fields, I just haven't gotten that far in my research on who he caught those passes from.
Quick clicking around, I think he caught a 27-yarder in the first half, and that was it. The rest came in the second half.
So 54 yards in the second half. I mean, it does seem like when Muskets come in, the same thing happened against North Carolina, I believe. Like he really struggled. Fields did with Calandria. And I think he had a little bit more success in the short period of time that Muscat was in the game, but the offense moved a little bit more, if I'm remembering correctly. So that might play into my research too.
Cool. All right, gentlemen, your start sits for your particular
playoff
games.
Yeah, I got actually, let's take a quick break and then I'll give you mine. Okay, so this is one for me. Then this is the 50-teamer. I believe in the 50-teamer we have 6-point passing touchdowns. I have Caton Hauser, right? We just talked about Winston Wright. They're playing North Texas. A little bit of a dream matchup. He did struggle last week against Tulsa, which was also a pretty decent matchup. And he just was, I don't know, he wasn't seeing the field well. And then I have Kevin Jennings, who we just talked about UVA. They're playing SMU. So SMU's playing UVA, and I have Kevin Jennings there too. Yeah. What would you guys do? Would you start Hauser against North Texas, or 6-point passing touchdown, or Jennings against UVA?
God, they're both excellent matchups. I feel like Jennings has been more consistent, but the concern I have with that is whether or not they keep the foot on the gas once they get up on a UVA team that has been very mistake prone. I mean, I think Calendry had 3 interceptions last game. I mean, he has one pretty much every game, at least, and usually it's 2. So do they keep the foot on the gas as opposed to ECU with the tempo they're going to have to deal with North Texas and the fact that they should be able to at least press them a bit? They're going to have to keep it up and try to score at the most ferocious pace that they can. So I do think that factors in. So I do lean on that side.
Yeah. I'd go same way. In the SMU, I mean, they run in a fast tempo. They've been pretty good, but I agree. Same concerns. It's like if the defense wasn't playing very well, and I know they showed some vulnerabilities, but like overall, they've been really, really tough. And like I said, Virginia, they're playing Virginia. Right? Virginia hasn't scored 20 points in 3 straight games. So.
Yeah. The other thing thinking about it too is like Brashard Smith could have 2 80-yard runs against that UVA defense. They get a pick 6, and it's like Kevin Jennings doesn't even play in the second half, and he's got maybe a touchdown or 2. And that would be no bueno for me. Let me ask you this one. This isn't mine necessarily, but I'm just staring at it, and I'm watching people that have Bryson Daly for Army. He's been a bread and butter guy for you all year, and they're playing Notre Dame. Who can you start? Is he startable this week, or do you have to bench him playing that defense?
I'm benching him personally. And in fact, it's funny, on Twitter, we just got a start sit question from a fellow named Daniel that, he basically put out his lineup and said, is there any way you should trade someone out? He has Owen McCown playing Temple as his QB1, and then he has Daly on the bench against Notre Dame. And I got to tell you, I got to go with Owen McCown as well in that situation, just to get a real life example. And the strength of opponent has everything to do with it. They're not as much of a factor in NFL, but has everything to do with CFF.
Yeah.
Yeah, glad we're talking about it because Daly was on my list as the first guy because he's going to be on a lot of playoff lineups, right? Because he's been crushing it as one of the top waiver wire ads. I think I'm going to go drop. Some leagues it's a little, or sorry, not drop. Don't drop him.
Sit.
I think I'm going to go sit. I think I'm going to sit him, man. Like, at some of these, it's tough. Like, I think I debated, it might be Alonzo Barnett. I'm considering, I'm like, God, he's been so up and down. Do I really want to bench Daly for Barnett? But the other ones, like I have Hauser. I'm just going Hauser, man. The matchup is not even comparable. It's a different sport they're going to be playing on Saturday. Neither team wants to push the tempo. Hopefully it doesn't make it look stupid, but I'm leaning towards sit if you have a good option. If you're not confident in your option, just play the studs. But there's a lot and there's some good matchups. Like some of these fringe guys, like Barnett plays App State. Hauser, North Texas. Some of these fringe guys are like fringe starters, maybe bench guys in some leagues are looking pretty good. So I'm gonna go sit.
Yeah, I like that a lot. JD, any others that you have on your team or things that you're looking at?
Yeah, I know it's harder for wide receivers, so I couldn't narrow it down because I had a lot of wide receivers. But basically, DT Sheffield, should I bench him this week? He's crushed me 2 straight weeks.
Oh, wow. Now this is the one, right? Who are your options?
I got him in a lot, but like I think I have Trent Walker in one league. I don't remember who Oregon State plays or if they do. Like Winston Wright for sure. I'm leaning Winston Wright. Luke Weissong.
Wow. Well, I mean, dude, New Mexico can do no wrong. So, I mean, how do you go wrong just taking a shot in there? Oh, man, I feel your pain. Let me ask you, what's going to feel worse? If you start him and he stinks, or if you don't start him and he goes off?
So I would live by the mantra, it's cool to love to win, but it's better to hate to lose. And I hate the losing. Either way, it could hurt you. But what I hate is looking stupid and making the wrong call. So I would rather not look stupid and play him.
You just don't want to play. You would rather play him.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 for 13 and 4 for 31, but he still got 8 targets 2 games ago against Army. It was just, I mean, it was bad against UTSA. It's a bad showing. I probably lean Sheffield to the moon, moon effect, right? Oh, forgive me.
And I know they're not. Yeah, and I know they're not playing exactly 1 for 1, but Joseph Williams going off last week against ECU on the outside. I know Sheffield will move around a little bit, play a lot of slot. So it's not a 1 for 1, but the fact that there was a wide receiver that just went off and ECU just looked
row. Yeah.
So I think you got to play him.
But then you got Winston Wright, and we know that they are going to light up North Texas. It's the safer play is Winston Wright, obviously. The higher upside, Sheffield.
I love it. It's good.
Are we ready to go to the waiver wire?
Let's do it. Let's get into the waiver wire picks. We will start off with QBs here. And what do you guys got? Proton, we'll start with you, actually, and then we'll move to JD.
Yeah. Well, for the quarterbacks, as we talked about a little bit, Jaden Mayava has to be mentioned, 24% owned. Obviously, he was picked up in a lot of places last week where he was decidedly not 24% owned. But UCLA coming this week in a rivalry game, even though UCLA has been playing better, that is still, I'm not worried about him putting up at least a respectable amount of points in a 2 QB, potentially 3 QB league, 14 teams or above. Kick that around. Not going to be as much of a play against Notre Dame probably the last week, but 1 week plug-in. Lenore Sellers, he went. I mean, the game he had against Missouri, I watched. I went and broke down his tape and went through it. Man, he was really good. He made some serious throws down the stretch, including 1, 2. Just what an amazing play scheme that you have to give to the coaching staff of South Carolina. Did you guys see the final play of that game with South Carolina scoring a touchdown on Missouri? It was perfect. It was like the classic inside shovel pass.
The Rocket Sanders one
goes back. Yep, yeah, exactly. Inside, and he just bowls through 2 tackles after it was perfect. It was just a beautiful play call. Sanders just would not be denied. What an amazing game. And Sellers owned in 41% of leagues, but playing Wofford this week, I mean, he'll probably rack up 4 touchdowns before he goes, shortly after halftime. Maybe he gets another drive after the third quarter. But I don't think they're going to have a problem scoring. They won't want to go too much to Rocket and probably rest him for Clemson coming the next week. But you could probably, if he's out there, and he's out there in a lot of leagues, give him a kick. Sam Levitt, Arizona State. I've talked about him obviously a lot on this program. Still 30% owned. BYU looked mortal against Kansas, even though that was, definitely a competitive game. They looked mortal the week before as well. I do think we'll get a pretty competitive contest out of that. And even if you don't want to start him against BYU, you pick him up this week. Final game, week 14, the finals against Arizona in that rivalry game. It doesn't get any better than Arizona's defense. Kick that around, 30% owned. And then lastly, long shot, Kewan Jenkins, QB, Florida International, only 10% owned. But playing Kennesaw, that there's a straight up mutiny going on there right now because they fired the longtime coach. Is it going to get better than Kennesaw? I don't think so. And then Middle Tennessee, if you're in a pinch, somebody gets hurt for that final week. So I think at 10%, you can give him a look.
Yeah, I like that. What do you got, JD?
Yes, I don't know how many leagues these guys are going to end up starting in, right? Because if you're in the playoffs, there's not a ton of streamers, but I know there's a wide array of fantasy formats and whatnot. So just some guys that pop out to me as interesting. Danny O'Neal just came off a nice game. Usually a decent system, runs a little bit, and he plays Utah State, which is one of those Purdue full fade teams for me. Them, New Mexico, Purdue, short list of absolute full fades. They're on there. Braylon Braxton, I can't remember if I mentioned this guy or not, but I've been meaning to for Marshall. They run a fast tempo. He's an explosive runner, runs the ball a decent amount. Doesn't really have a scary matchup. Old Dominion, that's a team that runs at a fast pace offensively, so it should be a decent amount of plays. Walker Eget, San Jose State. We mentioned him last week, and he had a really nice game, was really low owned in the night slate on DraftKings. I don't know. They throw the ball a ton. We mentioned it. They're going to keep throwing the ball. They have Stanford for the championship, and then this week they have UNLV. So it should be a decent amount of attempts. So I think he's all right. If you really need someone, Matthew Caldwell on Troy. Not for this week. I wouldn't play him against Louisiana. They more so give stuff up on the ground than they do through the air. But he's had 24 fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he has Southern Miss in the championship. So if you're looking for a streamer. And then speaking of Louisiana, their quarterback got hurt, and Chandler Field stepped in. He's an experienced backup, runs a little bit. I mean, their metrics have been fantastic. They've been moving the heck out of the ball, and they probably still do against Troy and ULM. So I don't hate that. And then Nate Yarnell Pitt, he's got the starting job. I know the offense is kind of falling apart, but it's still a scheme that runs a lot of plays, likes to run the quarterback. Louisville's definitely not a dream matchup, but their secondary's been burned quite a few times this year. So those are the guys who made my list.
Yeah, Ashton Daniels made it look like a dream matchup last week. To back up your EGAT point, UNLV is dead last in pass attempts given up per game at 39.1. So they will throw the ball around quite a bit, San Jose State. And look, I mean, when you're throwing up to Nick Nash and Justin Lockhart, I mean, both of those guys are going to go up and get the ball. So, he'll throw 3 interceptions, but also throw 3 touchdowns, and it'll be a fun ride for you. And he'll keep you in the game engaged. So I like that a lot. All right, running backs. JD, why don't you start us off with your running backs?
Yes, sir. I'm not going to mention Shane Porter because what on earth was that?
That is a wino, is what that is. A wide receiver in name only, Shane Porter. Yes.
Absurd. I'm just checking my phone. I was at the high school game, so I'm checking my phone. I'm like, along North Texas. Shane Porter? I'm like, this app must be totally broken. Why does Shane Porter keep going for 40-yard touchdowns 3 times? What's happening? Anyway, in that game, Robert Henry, UTSA. Again, I think I've mentioned him before.
Yep.
Just had really great metrics and has really kind of become the bell cow, decent little receiver. And we've already mentioned defense being terrible and the fact that they're going to be a shootout team. I like Henry. I think he's a fine player. I think streamers at this point, hard to come by. A guy I couldn't believe was at 6% ownership is Keon Mosey for Miami. It's been 2 straight years now where they're running back every single game, and don't fact check this because it's almost every single game, gets 100 yards. Every single game, the running back gets 100 yards. They're a good team. They play good defense. It's there's few things you can really trust on the MAC, and that's been one of them. So NIU and Bowling Green aren't necessarily fantastic matchups, but I'm not necessarily sure either one is like a stay away. Other than that, those were the main two guys who made my list. What are you guys looking at this week?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tom.
the aforementioned Duke Watson has to be considered. I mean, we've seen how effective that Louisville running back situation is with Isaac Brown. You already mentioned it. I don't think I need to belabor the point, but just keep in mind that Duke Watson went for 117 and 3 touchdowns against Stanford in just 11 carries, playing against Pitt that has a better defense and obviously Kentucky as well. But he is going to be widely owned in, I would think, almost every league, and at least has to be considered due to his role. Josh McCray, Illinois, is not – he's only 9% owned, which is kind of puzzling
crazy
to me. I mean, he's had the gig for a little bit here against Michigan State last week in a game that Illinois had pretty good control of. 61 yards, 3 touchdowns, has a catch. Previous game against Minnesota, 7 carries, 72 touchdowns. Should be 72 yards, a touchdown. Is he great? You know, he's not a number one running back, but if we're looking at where we are right now in the current situation, he should probably be a little bit more owned. And they're playing against Rutgers, who their run D is proven to be a bottom 25 unit in the entire FBS, not even the Power 4, and then Northwestern. So there's a couple of pretty favorable matchups for Mr. McCray there to at least consider. And then lastly, Georgia, Nate Frazier. I mean, he's the only healthy guy there. They're really rating the depth chart at this point, playing against UMass and then Georgia Tech. They punched their ticket to at least, I would say, the playoff with that Tennessee win, no matter what happens. So do they really need to go balls out against a UMass team that just fired Don Brown? Literally yesterday. Georgia Tech, I don't think so. But with Frazier, he's the only guy who's really healthy. I think he'll at least probably punch in a couple touchdowns that are almost free. And he's 29% owned. So you can get him off the wire. You'll probably get at least 1 touchdown. Very high floor option if you're in a desperate situation.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Couple for me, I got Devontae Lyons, FIU. I went kind of super deep cut here. He's 0% owned, but he's a guy in the offseason on signing day that the coaching staff really liked. It's taken him a little bit to get into the starting lineup, but he started this last week. He had 12 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown this last week. And, you know, this week he faces Kennesaw State. We've already talked about them, but they're ranked 97th in yards per game given up on the ground at 170. And they're giving up 4.5 yards per carry. So, look, if you're desperate, now that's a super deep cut. So, but if you're desperate or you need somebody, I mean, he's a guy that I think could get you 14, 15 points. Another guy I like. And we've gone to this well a few times. And JD, you talked about the quarterback for Louisiana. But look, Draylon Washington just every week seems to get 15 points a game. And it's only a matter of time before both him and Elijah Davis, who also goes by Bill Davis. Both of them are very efficient, right? They're very much will remind you of past Louisiana backfields. But Draylon Washington's another guy that you could pick up 2% owned in your leagues, and he could probably get you 15 points this week. So, yeah, 2 matchups, 2 players that I like as deeper cuts there. Yeah, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get into there's a bunch of wide receivers on the wire this week that I think we need to talk about. All right, JD, we'll let you start first, man. Why don't you give us your wide receivers?
Yeah, I think this is a position you're more likely to have a pick them up, put them in kind of guy. So there's a lot of options. I'm sure I'm going to miss some. I just want to mention Emmett Mosley on Stanford. I know it's Stanford. Can you trust him? I don't know. I don't know if I can, but he's definitely going to be in consideration for me. He's a guy I ended up targeting in Dynasty supplementals once I heard his teammates talk about him over the summer. where they said, like, how good does he look? And they're like, he looks like a potential Bolitnikov candidate. Like, there wasn't just this kid's impressive. It's like, whoa. So once I heard that, I'm like, oh, it wouldn't really surprise me if he's the wide receiver one over Alec Ayo. And that hasn't been the case, but he's also been injured. He was injured to start the year, missed a number of games. He now has double-digit targets in 3 of his last 4 games and just went absolutely bonkers, which is very rare for a true freshman to do. So I think this is a supremely talented kid for an offense without many talented players in general. I'm going to get his name wrong, but Justin Bowick, Ball State.
Yeah.
Sure. Where did you come from, buddy? You want to get 30 points every game? This is the thing now. I don't know. You're getting 11 targets back-to-back games. There's one of those teams. There's not much else going on. It was just Cozy all the tight end and nothing all year. I mentioned their wide receiver, Ty Robinson. It was like the only wide receiver worth noting. He literally got hurt on the first play of the season, and then he came back, and I believe he was stretchered off in the same game he came back in later on in the year. So they've had nothing. So it kind of makes sense they would funnel this guy with targets going forward. So I think he's going to be one of the hottest pickups this week. Other than that, Javon Tracy, so some more Mac guys. Javon Tracy on Miami of Ohio, 7% owned, and his teammate Reginald Virgil is 5% owned. They've been crushing it. Galbert's been in college for 6-7 years. They have a pretty good chemistry. They played in, I believe, 2 bad weather games in a row, and they've still just been crushing it. McDonald's been injured. He was a surprise late scratch last week. So if he's out again this week, I think both those guys are heavily in starting consideration, especially Tracy, a guy like we've kind of seen. He hasn't really been fantasy relevant because they haven't had the Galbert's been out of the lineup, but like he's had a few big games, and when he gets the passing, just a clearly very talented player for max standards. And it's been 3 straight weeks the guy's crushed it. I think he's the 7% number makes no sense. It must be something about Miami, Ohio. Actually, I think what it is about Miami, Ohio, they have that insane non-conference slate. So like probably just no one wanted to own these guys because they're all getting like 4 fantasy points a game, but not the case anymore. Conference play, it's been pretty much every single week with these guys. Other than that, that's pretty much all I had.
Yeah, it's kind of funny story about Bowick. He got picked up by Brady McCulloch and Jim Weber in the 50-teamer, and they started him and JJ Jenkins in the playoffs.
Oh.
Picked them both up last week and just had like 70 points. I think they beat the number 1 seed.
Oh my god!
I was like, man, that's a brutal way for Nick Dunning. I think it was Nick Dunning to lose. I felt bad for the guy, but yeah, I did not want that smoke. I don't have to face them to the finals if I was to get that far. But it was pretty funny. Thought that was a great story for Justin Bowick. Anyways, Proton, give us your commentary on wide receivers here.
Oh, well, it's funny. You mentioned a couple of guys that I've already picked up. I picked up JJ Jenkins in the Dynasty League, the Industry Dynasty League. They were both in. For some reason, some of those Mac guys, they're listed as free agents and they're not listed on the waivers. So I was going through it and I actually picked up Justin Bowick for free as a free agent and JJ Jenkins. So I am already invested in our friend JD's Mac wide receiver theory in terms of on a dynasty perspective, picking them up, stashing them, and just looking at them to, one, maybe these guys transfer up and go to a better situation, or 2, maybe they stick around and you just eat them as a roster spot for that non-conference slate when they're playing Power 4 teams.
Really quick, Proton.
Yeah.
I'm just going to point out, I'm glad you mentioned the free agent thing because I just picked up Bowick in the Kings Classic League while you were talking. So.
It's exactly, guys. It's a little loophole right now. You can literally pick up Justin Bowick. It's Bowick. I watched that game last week, which is why I picked him up. I had some action on it. Let's just put it that way. I had Braden Sloan's under, which he didn't even play in the first half. And then he shows up in the third quarter. I'm like, oh, Braden Sloan, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for participating, Braden Sloan, giving us your under generously. But yeah, Bowick showed out in that game during the Braden under show. So definitely popped, and that was an excellent call. Great job on that one, JD. And good to hear you're profiting, as well as the rest of the listeners here who are astutely on top of this stuff. That being said, I also wanted to mention Emmett Mosley, as you said. Everything JD said is completely relevant in terms of freshmen, wide receivers. Campus of Canton, give a shout out to our friends. They put out their year 1-0 wide receiver list, which is any freshman wide receiver that did not have less than 100 yards, 10 receptions, or I believe like 2 touchdowns, maybe is what it is. Maybe 1 touchdown, is considered, a year 1-0 as like just not being affected at all in their team's game plan. And if you do a year 1-0, you are infinitely less statistically likely to be an impact wide receiver from a draft perspective to the NFL. So that's a Campus Canton stat, but it applies here because Emmett Mosley is a true freshman. He is at the Power 4 level, and he did just completely rip the top off of, a ACC defense. So definitely deserves to be respected. And last, obviously, Shane Porter. Shane Porter qualifies at wide receiver. Wino.
Yep.
He's a running back. He's getting carries, obviously, here. He scored 3 touchdowns, 2% owned, and he's a wino. So, if you want to cheat, Taylor Morin, 13%. They got at Miami and then Duke. Miami just breeds shootouts. Dude, Taylor Morin is so consistent. Each of the past 4 games, he's just cranking out teens, even a 20 or 2 spot in there if you want to. Just a good, solid, about as safe a wide receiver as you're going to get with that Wake Forest passing attack, whether it's Michael Kern, whether it's Bachmeier, whoever. 13% owned, worth a stab.
Yeah. I like that a lot. If Mosley doesn't start catching that ball with his hands instead of his body, I'm going to go berserk. Just watching his, every catch from that last game, I'm like, dude, just catch it with your hands, bro. Like you're
definitely got a few
incredible.
manufactured touches in there. They wanted to let him do his thing, right? Yeah,
he does. And I will say one of the things that I liked about him for this week in particular is they're going to play California, the Golden Bears, and they don't like to let you go over the top at all. And so I think the way that Mosley was winning with a lot of it underneath route running, I think he could have quite a bit of success against California this next week. Couple other wide receivers I had. We've talked about him before, but worth mentioning again, Dymere Miller from Rutgers. He had another, I think, 11 target game this time, 107 yards. Look, until he doesn't do it, I think he's worth looking at. And then the other one, we already mentioned him, but Joseph Williams from Tulsa just went absolutely bananas on ECU. That kid, I'm sure there's a better comp, but he reminds me a lot of Elijah Surratt from Indiana now, JMU, when JMU is playing at that G5 level where he can win in a lot of ways. He's a bigger framed wide receiver, Joseph Williams is, but look, dude can catch 60-yard bombs, and he caught, passes in the red zone too. And those type of guys you really, really like to have on your team. And they play USF this week, and USF has been decent in some ways, but passing defense has not been their strength. They're 126th in yards per game at 265.9, and then 112th in yards per attempt at 7.9. So I think that that Tulsa, while they may not win that game, I think they could have some success through the air, particularly because they're going to be the underdogs in that game as well. So like Joseph Williams there, I think that's all I got at wide receiver. It is crazy. Justin Lockhart is also only 19% owned. Not that he's a guy that I'm going to go after a ton, but
he was awesome available last game. Yeah, awesome.
And they're going to have to check the ball against UNLV, and we already talked about 39 pass attempts. They're funneling them to essentially 2 wide receivers for most of the game. You could do worse than Justin Lockhart. Any thoughts or any comments on the players I talked about? All right,
you're covering it. You're the man. You're the genius.
Yeah, you got it. Well done, my friend.
Proton, or JD, whoever wants to take this first, because I got almost nothing here at tight end, unless I'm just going to talk about the same guys we talked about a million times that are like 10% owned. But you guys got anything on tight ends here?
I have Sam Roush is 25% owned, playing Cal, and San Jose State, especially in that final game. Hey, San Jose State, Stanford. I mean, I think you got a pretty good look there, 25%, maybe a look ahead spot. Maliki Mateveo. I know that he's been mentioned on this show before. I'm pretty sure JD is a fan of his. He had a great game last game, and for a resurgent UCLA team that over the past 4 games has been increasingly relevant. At least they're scoring some points here. 7 catches, 68 yards, and a touch. 4 for 52, 6 for 104 over the past 3 games. I mean, that's as dependable as you're really going to get, and high floor as it gets from a tight end position. So I'd advise you give him a look as well. 6% owned. Playing USC and Fresno. Excellent schedule down the stretch. USC and Fresno for 6% owned. That's as good as you get for a tight end.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I mean, the only one that I really put down, obviously Joshua Simon is at 28%. And so of course, if he's available in your league, pick him up, right? Yeah. Like that's a no duh one there. But the other one that I would consider is Miles Kitselman. I mean, Tennessee wide receivers are struggling. He's been a little bit of a safety blanket, feels like.
They're not struggling. Chris Brazell has been he's rapidly approaching All-American status for player props. So
right. Yeah, for sure.
He's been a godsend for us.
Yeah. So look, Miles has done a lot better here, and I like him a lot in this one. So he's a guy that I would consider. UTEP is probably not the matchup for you, but he could come back around. In the last week, I believe they play Vanderbilt, so they might need him there. As a defense, it's pretty decent. So any other final closing thoughts on week 13 playoff semifinals coming down to the end of it?
Yeah, week 13. I'm excited to be in the semifinals of the Golden Pig Invitational with our friend Volume Pigs, Justin Leo. As we discussed, my 24-year home league. This is the SIC 5 conference championship. I'll be playing to win the Boz Cup. This is the 3rd time I have been in the conference championship in the last 4 years. So it's, things have been going well. And then I'm still in it in the Talkin' Dynasty, Dynasty Nerds League, startup league that I did this year. With Garrett Price and Jared Wackerly, a couple of great guys I got to hang out with at the Fantasy Football Expo. I said the College Fantasy Football Expo. I wish it was the College Fantasy Football Expo, but hung out with those guys. So I'm still hanging around in that league too. So it's a C2C format. So excited. I got a few leagues that are still kicking around, but at the same time, bittersweet. Like really thinking about it, getting gassed up today for week 13 game. It was just like, man, the NFL, they still got like a third of the season left. You know what I mean? I think they have week 14. I think they have 4 more regular season weeks, and then they have playoffs for 3 weeks. It's like, man, we got 1 more week left. It's crazy. A sprint. We always remind ourselves. I love that we have the extra week, like 13 and 14. We get 11 or 12 regular season weeks now, as opposed to just having to go to the 13 weeks. At least we get the 14 with the 2 buys, but man, it still goes so fast, and it's just, it makes me sad. But we'll bet all the props we can over the next 2 weeks, and then the conference championships, and then. Luckily, this year, the bowl games start right after the conference championship games. Goes from the 7th of December right to the 14th.
Yep.
Where, the 14th, it's on. You have Army, Navy, and you have, I think, 3 bowl games. Yeah. So you go right to it, and the way they're doing bowl season is better. They're just jumping right into it. And after that 14th, you'll have it the 16th. They have a couple, and then so on and so forth. So I think they're doing it better structurally now. And keep in mind, guys, we get playoff games. I think the 19th. I think it's that Thursday. We start getting playoff games shortly after the conference championships. You get conference championships. Right. You get essentially, that weekend in between, and then you're starting that Thursday. It's like 11 days away. We used to have to wait until the national championship till after the new year. It's a new world. It's going to be fun. We get everything is sped up. We get it quicker now.
I love the new format. And look, we're going to try to put out a couple special things here at CFF All Access. We're going to try to do both a bowl pick'em league, and then we're going to try to create kind of every year we participate in these different bowl leagues where you can pick kind of your top players and throw them into a lineup and see who scores the most points. And so we'll try to set that up for our listeners and for us and have a fun time participating in that together. So look out for that. I'll mention that at the next show at the beginning too, so that we make sure to get some good participation in that. We lost JD on this stream.
That's all right. He lasted most of the show. He lasted enough.
Yes, he did. So sad to lose him, but we'll get him back next week. And Froton, man, good luck in all of your semifinals. I think I'm in 6 of them.
You too, brother.
And
you too.
Hopefully we're talking next week, not about the regrets of who we picked that crapped out for us, but the guys that won it for us, that we picked well. And hopefully this show helped me settle in on Hauser and the 50-teamer. So hopefully I'm coming back next week and we're rejoicing together with me in the championship game. We'll see how it works out.
So, yeah, brother. But looking forward to it next week. Thank you very much, everybody. And Josh.
Until next time, do small things with great love.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.